No, Chairperson, we do not have quorum yet.
Oh, I'll give it a minute or so. Okay, Ms. Kamish Ahmed, I think we have quorum. May I start?
Morning, Chair. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Colleagues, welcome to the Budget Committee meeting. My name is Deirdre Bartman, Chair of the committee. Today we are tabling from the National Treasury and the NCOP the very last division of revenue bill that we will be receiving for our term. As usual, they will take us through the respective presentation. I will then open up for questions and answers for the members. And then if there are any members from the public, I'll open up for questions and answers as well. And then we have one set of minutes, and that's our agenda for the day. I just want to check quickly, Ms. Kamish Ahmad, whether we have any apologies. I know Member America has moved over to local government. I know Member Van der Veste is standing in for him. I just want to check for any other apologies before I open up for introductions.
No apologies received, Chair.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Members, if you can please introduce yourselves, and then I will hand over to National Treasury and the Provincial Treasury delegates for introduction as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Andrikus van der Westhuizen, as you introduced me.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Kayla Murray, member of the committee.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other members on the MS Team panel, so I'll hand over to the National Treasury delegation for introduction first.
Good morning to the honorable members. My name is Litsea Papakis. With the Treasury, responsible for the local government fiscal framework. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, honorable members. My name is Madlenkosi Khobiani from the National Treasury, from the Provincial Budget Analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Honorable Chair.
Mr. Ngobeni, you may go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Good morning, Honorable Chair, honorable members, colleagues, and everyone in the meeting. My name is Marvin Ngobeni from National Treasury's IDR unit, responsible for DORA implementation for local government. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Honorable Chair. My name is Olorato Tlhaele, and I work in the National Treasury in the Intergovernmental Relations Division, responsible for the Provincial Fiscal Framework in the Division of Revenue Bill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. If there are no other National Treasury officials, then I will hand over for introduction for the Provincial Treasury officials.
Good morning to the Budget Committee, to Chairperson and members, Annelies Pick, Provincial Treasury.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Michelle Nicholas, Provincial Treasury.
Morning.
Good morning, Chair and members. Shirley Robinson, Provincial Treasury, Chief Director of Public Policy Services. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And good morning from me as well, Steve Kenyon, Local Government Public Finance in the Provincial Treasury.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to then just have a look here. I don't see anyone else. Mr. Swart?
Hi, good morning, Paul Swart, Soldier.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm going to check. I don't see anyone else. Okay. Colleagues, I'm then handing over straight to National Treasury for their presentation, and that will then be followed by questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks, honorable members. Good morning again. Going to take you through the first part of our presentation, just to perhaps indicate that Mandla will come in, Olorato and Marvin, and then we will then assist the honorable members in terms of the Q&A session. So what is quite important from us honorable members at this point is to indeed confirm that this bill has gone through all the relevant forums, the intergovernmental forums, the technical forums, and we're presenting it to you today with obviously some of the challenges that we still experience as the country, where we're not growing as well as we would have hoped that we would. So that then has an impact in some of the decisions that have been considered throughout the process. Chief and quite concerning for all of us as a country is the debt service cost. If you can see, the highest growing item in the budget is the debt service cost, which grows at 7.3%. So this is the money that we pay before we do anything else, really. So if we can manage to contain that growth there, we then are in a position to then deal quite better with some of our own priorities, especially, those that would have been identified in the provincial as well as the local government level, where, there's the cold face of delivery. So with experiencing those challenges then, honorable members, we are pretty pleased that at least we have tried to, respond to the many challenges that local government is facing. If you look at the growth in terms of local government, it's only second to the growth that we're seeing in terms of the debt service costs. And this is driven by the equitable share, which is growing at 6.1%. This is owing really to the many cost factors, that we have had to respond to in this budget, in the formula. Of course, honorable members, that growth in terms of the debt service costs, coupled with some of the issues that are being faced by the country in terms of energy, freight, and many other state-owned institutions that are struggling. We've had to implement some fiscal consolidation measures, which my colleagues are going to speak quite in detail about in terms of how they affect the provincial and as well as the local spheres of government in terms of the budget reductions that we have had to implement. But you would be happy to know that there are also some additions that have been put into the system to really try to cushion some of our main priorities in this government. Here, honorable members, is really another lens at which, we would like to take to the honorable members. I'm well aware you are aware of this, but perhaps maybe for the sake of the public, it's always quite important for us to share the information that is coming out from the Division of Revenue from various viewpoints. So if you look at the 24-25 Division of Revenue, on my left, you will see that the largest chunk of the budget is really on the the national sphere, owing to the functions that have been allocated to that sphere, and 9.7% of the national raised revenue is then allocated to local government. But in our right, we're showing, honorable members, that that picture is incomplete if one just looks at it without taking into account the own revenue raising powers that local government has. So just looking at the outcomes of the 22-23 financial year that are out, one can see that actually, if you start to look at the division of revenue from that particular lens, you start to see that actually local government is being provided with quite a lot of own revenue raising powers, which then complement the 9% that they will be getting from national. And this, honorable members, is the actual revenue collected. You can imagine, then we are all aware of the inefficiencies in the system, especially at the collection level at a local government. This picture would actually be quite favorable to local government if we were to consider the ability to then collect what there hasn't been that hasn't been collected in the last few years. Again, honorable members, this slide really shows government's policy on redistribution. We're starting to see that even though the intention of the division of revenue really is to ensure that we fully subsidize for the provision of services, but where we not, the revenue raising powers of each sphere of government, but also with each municipality as well, have to come to the picture. There's a strange phenomenon, if you've been picking up over the years, that is emerging. So there used to be a time where, the allocations, especially per household in the metros, and the rural municipalities. So where you would find that in the rural municipalities, it's twice as much as in the metros. That's not the case now, as you can see. But this is also, around the issues where we're seeing the poverty, starting to urbanize as well, and government having to respond to those kind of issues, but also that the equitable share itself, is put out in such a way that it prioritizes the provision of basic services. So the more demands are in that side, it doesn't matter where you sit in the country, the funds would have to follow the function in that regard. So we also seeing in the provincial space as well, there used to be huge differences in how we then fund the rural provinces to the urban provinces, but now there's also the shifts already taking place. If you look at the conditional grants, you will see that there isn't really much difference in terms of what the Western Cape, for instance, is getting as a more developed province to the Eastern Cape, who would indicate that they are more rural in terms of the development there. So that's the picture that is emerging now, honorable members, and it would require a policy response from government. That is not part of this presentation. The honorable members also just need to note that there are also other developments outside of this bill that are taking place to address some of these issues. The treasuries are leading in terms of the review of the provincial equitable share. Also, the treasury is leading in terms of the review of the local government equitable share. The issue of powers and function is also gaining some momentum, driven by the Department of Cooperative Governance. We've also just concluded the review of the conditional grants in the system. We're finalizing the report to then start the consultation on the implications of those, and those will come into the next budget. So there are many other reforms, honorable members, that are taking place that are also trying to address the many issues that you've been raising in the past, especially around the issues of energy and so forth. At this point, then, honorable members, allow me to call on Olorato to then take us through the changes to the pay clauses. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members. The next set of slides will take the Honorable Members through the changes to the Division of Revenue Bill clauses. Of which the first one makes reference or makes changes to Section 10 within the Division of Revenue Bill. This particular clause is updated to ensure that the Schedule 5 and 6 allocations are monitored within the Division of Revenue Bill. Previously, the clause made reference to Schedule 5 allocations and actually then only included municipalities. The amendment then allows or places a requirement on the transferring officer to ensure that they jointly monitor both Schedule 5 and 6 allocations, and Schedule 6 allocations being indirect grants, but also the amendment then ensures that the applicability is both for provincial and local government grants. With regard to the second change, it is an amendment to Section 12 of the Division of Revenue Bill, and it is updated to include the applicability, this clause to apply to the Informal Settlements Upgrading Partnership Grant. The clause previously only included the Human Settlements Development Grant, and it was in relation to the allocations that would be gazetted in terms of this clause with regard to expenditure that is planned within these provincial grants in the municipal space, particularly for municipalities with level 1 or 2 accreditation. So in order to make sure that municipalities that would have level 1 or 2 accreditation that would implement the functions within the Informal Settlements Upgrading Grant, we are making then an amendment to this particular clause to apply to that specific conditional grant, that those allocations also then have to be gazetted. And this is in line then with the change in Section 6A, subsection 6C. And to then make a parallel change then in this section, we are then also making sure that if there are any amendments to these allocations, then it is also applicable to the Informal Settlements Upgrading Grant. The very last one on this slide, which is Section 14, it is with regard to the requirements for departments to actually then indicate the extent to which they comply with the Division of Revenue Act. Previously, the clause made reference to the departments actually then indicating the extent of how they comply to the Division of Revenue Act when they monitor then the conditional grant allocations. The amendment then provides clarity that aside from then indicating that extent, they must also then indicate the kind of systems that they would have put in place in order to monitor the allocations that flow from the Division of Revenue in compliance with the Act. Next slide. In this next slide, the first amendment at the top is to Section 16 of the Division of Revenue Bill. And the first amendment is the one that makes provision for allocations to be shifted within components of a conditional grant. The amendment then provides clarity that the shift of the funds between the two components takes effect on the day that the amount would be gazetted or would be published in a notice of a gazette. So the amendment is meant to clarify that the shifts come into effect on the date when that gazette then is published. The next amendment, still to this particular, to section 16, is meant to include the applicability of this section to Schedule 4 grants, which places a requirement on transferring officers that they meet, or transferring and receiving officers that they meet certain requirements before allocations can be transferred to any other organ of state. So previously then the section was applicable to Schedule 4 grants, where receiving officers will utilize other organs of state to implement the functions within the conditional grant. The amendment then has been extended to include Schedule 5 allocations. And it is meant, Schedule 4 allocations. My apologies, Chair. So the applicability then is to ensure that the requirements then for both Schedule 4 and 5 allocations are met prior to any receiving officer allocating these funds to any other organs of state to implement these functions on their behalf. And then the last change to section 16 also then makes inclusion for the informal settlements partnership upgrading grant, similar to other sections in the bill that would have made reference to the Human Settlements Development Grant. In this instance as well, it is in the case where municipalities with level 1 or 2 accreditation, where they would then be required to implement functions that are implemented through the Informal Settlements Upgrade Partnership Grant. So the requirements in this section then also require that the receiving officer and the relevant municipalities also have an agreement with regard to a payment schedule. So this amendment then is also then to ensure that municipalities have certainty on the allocations that they would be required to receive if then they not only have the accreditation, but they also implement the functions that are funded through the Informal Settlements Upgrading Partnership Grant. The next one is an amendment to, next slide. The next one then is an amendment to section 20 with regard to the conversion of allocations. In this amendment, we are including further consultation with provincial treasuries. Previously, the clause then required that the consultation be between the relevant provincial department and municipality, along with the National Treasury, the transferring and receiving officers. In the amendment, then, the extension is meant to include consultation with provincial treasuries to also weigh in on the intended conversion of allocations between Schedule 5 and 6 allocations. And it would be helpful for the provincial treasuries to be consulted so that the National Treasury is also able to make informed decisions. The last one is amendments with regard to Schedule 7 allocations. And the first amendment is made to place a requirement that allocations for the immediate relief following a disaster are transferred within 100 days after the classification of a disaster, and not necessarily 100 days after the actual disaster. With the current phrasing, there were challenges that were faced by the Provincial Disaster Management Center as well as the National Disaster Management Center in terms of meeting this requirement, and it would be unfair to both the provincial and to the provinces and municipalities, where in the instance where, because of the processes that take place, the assessment of a disaster and before it is classified, for the funds not to be transferred. So the amendment at this stage then is to place a requirement that once the disaster has been classified, then the funds would have to be transferred within 100 days. The very last one makes provision for the NDMC to stipulate timeframes within which Schedule 7 allocations need to be spent. Previously, this provision was included in the conditional grant frameworks, and it would be within a period of 6 months. But unfortunately, then the provision didn't allow for the National Disaster Management Center to actually then specify these timelines. So the amendment then allows for the NDMC to specify the timelines through the approval letters on a case-by-case basis. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Chair. I think the slides from here will be focusing on provinces, and I will be taking you through the slides. This slide, Chair, shows the total transfers that would be transferred to the provinces in 2024-25. And as we can see from the slide, that the total equitable share amounts to about 600 billion, and conditional grant 128.9 billion, and the total transfers will amount to 729.5 billion. And when you look at how much goes then towards the Western Cape is 62 billion with the equitable share, and the conditional grants of 14.9 billion in total. Then Western Cape will be receiving 76.9 billion from national. So the total transfers to provinces account about 97.3% of the provincial revenue in 2024-25. And that when you look at the equitable share is actually growing with a 3.9 at an annual average of 3.9%, while the conditional grant grows with 3.7%. And with this chair, the transfer will have a combination of both the reductions in terms of your fiscal consolidation, and as well as additions or additional allocation towards the equitable share. And mainly, Chair, the additional allocation that goes to province through the equitable share will be for the wage to deal with the wage pressures, mainly for health and education. Next slide. So when you go to this slide, then we deal with the technical updates to the provincial equitable share formula. And this slide mainly focuses on the availability of data that is used on the equitable share formula. And we are making a point that some of the components of the equitable share would be updated with your 2023 MTF data, or the data that was used in the 2023 MTF. At the time of determining the formula, there was no release of the mid-year population estimates from Stats SA for 2023. And this was mainly because of the anticipated release of the 2022 census. However, when the 2022 census was eventually then released, it was then discovered that not all the information that is required to update the formula was available. So only available data can update the formula then was actually from the 2022 mid-year population estimates, which was then used to update the current 2024 MTF. And similarly, it goes with the economic activity component, that the data that was used there is the one that was used to update the 2023 MTF, and the data that was used is the 2019 regional GDP data that was last officially published by Stats SA. But Stats SA is currently doing a review in terms of the methodology that informs the determination of the regional GDP. And when that is actually done, I think it will also be incorporated going forward in the formula. Next slide. So, Chair, after having gone through the challenges in terms of the data availability, this slide then takes us through the technical update to the provincial equitable share formula. that the update made in the equitable share formula include the technical update to all components with the most recent data where possible, and that the continuation of phasing in the changes to the health component as a result of the PES review. So you will note in that table, Chair, that shows all the components in terms of the equitable share formula that you've got a repetition of your mid-year population estimate for 2022 that would have been used because of a challenge in terms of the availability of data. But where possible, Chair, where we managed to get the new data, we have been able to incorporate it. For example, the 2023 school enrollment data, the insured population, as well as the patient load data as reflected in the table. We can move to the next slide. So this then Chair shows us the changes to the provincial equitable share allocation, as we have already indicated that the changes to transfers will actually be a combination of additions and reductions to the provincial equitable share. So in terms of reduction due to the fiscal pressure, which resulted in the fiscal consolidation, the provincial equitable share was reduced with about 19.6 billion for 2024-25, 20.6 billion for 25-26, 21.3 billion for 2026-2027. And with that, Chair, there is also a reprioritization and additions. I think we'll remember that during the 2023 MTBPS, an announcement of 68.2 billion was announced towards provinces to cover the carry-through cost of the 2023 wage agreement for health and education. However, that amount also has since been reprioritized, that 3.9 billion was redirected towards conditional grants for these two sectors. As we know that for conditional grants, there is also a COE spending there. So an amount of 136 million was redirected towards education. And the 3.8 billion was reallocated towards health in terms of conditional grant. Then the remaining 64 billion of the 68.2 billion was then remained within the provincial equitable share and was allocated to the province using the equitable share formula. Furthermore, Chair, with the final allocation letter to provinces, an additional amount of 87.3 billion has been added to the provincial equitable share over the MTF, mainly for health and education. This was mainly to continue to support the provinces with the cost emanating from public wage or public service wage agreement. You can go to the next slide. And I think with just to go back a little bit, with the last point of the 37.3 billion, Chair, I think what I did not emphasize there was that this amount were actually mainly meant for health and education, but it was not necessarily restricting provinces for them to allocate it to education and health. It was actually meant for the province to use it to have a discretion in terms of allocation with the pressures in terms of other departments as well. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Then changes to the conditional grant. Conditional grants also, Chair, got a reduction, and 26.8 billion over the MTF as follow: 6 billion in 2024-25, 9 billion in 25-26, and 11 billion in 26-27. There was also a reprioritization of about 1.1 billion, which was previously added to early childhood a development grant to pilot a nutrition support program and a result-based service delivery model. These funds are reprioritized to a national government over the MTF as the nutrition support program and the result-based service delivery model will be implemented by a national government. An amount of 737 million is also shifted from National Health Insurance Grant to National Tertiary Service Grant. This is to allow the funding for oncology services to be consolidated under single grant. Previously, this funding of oncology used to sit with these two different grants, but they have now been consolidated to one single conditional grant. So lastly, in terms of the reprioritization, to improve the management of the NHI grant, the personal service component and non-personal service component have been merged to form a new health system component under NHI grant. This is just to improve the management of the NHI grant. So, Chair, in terms of the additions also that would be coming to the province, I think the Department of Education in the Western Cape, with the support of the Provincial Treasury, made an application to the National Treasury in terms of the BFI for the Western Cape Rapid Build Program. And this application has been provisionally approved for the amount which was actually applied. The total amount that was actually allocated towards the province will be 2.5 billion over the MTF, but I must emphasize that this is actually a provisional allocation. Subject to the province meeting some of the criteria that have been set or some of the outstanding information that has been requested from the province. And as such, the money to the province or the flow of funds to the province will start during the adjustment period. And I must indicate that there was a deadline of the 29th of March for the information to be submitted to the BFI team. And I must indicate that the province has complied with that, and it would still have to go through the process of evaluation. Evaluation. Okay. In terms of the changes to this slide actually summarizes what we started with to say that there was both additions and reduction in terms of the provincial baselines. And when you look at the table below, it then shows you that the total additional to the baseline over the MTF for two provinces amounts to 105 billion. Which then provincial equitable share contributed about 101 billion, while conditional grant contributed at 3.9 billion. But this is just for additions. However, this has been augmented by the reduction in terms of the baseline due to this, the fiscal constraints that we faced, that then the provincial equitable share was actually reduced by 61.5 billion, while conditional grant was reduced by 24.6 billion, then totaling to 86.1 billion. This then takes us to the net balance to the baseline, or net increase to the baseline of 19.3 billion, with equitable share showing an increase of 40 billion, while the conditional grant is showing a decline of or a reduction of 20.7 billion. So with With the following slide, Chair, is just the details in terms of what is actually allocated to the Western Cape. The 76.9 billion that I have earlier referred to is reflected with equitable share and conditional grants, and the rest of the table then just shows how much is allocated per conditional grant. And similarly goes to the next slide. It's just a continuation of what is allocated in terms of the conditional grant. I thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. Are you still going to go through the local government transfers, or are you going to end there?
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Chair. So from my side, I'll be taking you through the local government part of the presentation. And then starting with this slide, Chair, so this slide basically depicts the local government allocation, and then in terms of the transfers to local government, they account for 9.8% of the nationally raised revenue, of which, as the opening remarks from Dr. Letsepa indicated, that the majority of revenues from local government are raised by municipalities themselves through their revenue raising powers, such as your service charges, your property rates, and other revenue streams that are available to them. And then overall direct allocations to local government, they grow at an annual average rate of 5.2% over the 24-25 MTEF. However, the local government equitable share grows at a rate of 6.1% over the MTEF. And then, Chair, if we look at the table that is on our screen as well, so the table is basically a summary of all the transfers to local government for the 24-25 MTEF, which would include your direct transfers as well as your indirect transfers to municipalities. So, and then we have also put in the column on the 23-24 adjustment budget. So that column is basically the outcome in terms of what was transferred or to municipalities in terms of equitable share and related, as well as conditional grants. And then for the 24-25 MTEF, in terms of direct transfers, municipalities will be receiving 170.2 billion, which obviously is a funding mix in the sense that it includes your equitable share and related, whereby the equitable share through the formula will be allocating 93.4 billion to municipalities, and then as well as the RSC levy replacement grant to district municipalities, where 6.6 billion will be allocated in 24-25. And then there's also the special support for councillor remuneration and ward committees to the tune of just over 1 billion. And then we also have the general fuel levy sharing with metros, to which the City of Cape Town is a recipient, where 16.1 billion will be shared between the metropolitan municipalities in the country. And then we also have your conditional grants made up of infrastructure and capacity building grants, whereby 52.9 billion is allocated to municipalities in 24-25. And then as far as infrastructure is concerned, we have 50.9 billion in 24-25. And then from a capacity building perspective, we have just over 2 billion. And then there's also indirect transfers, as I indicated earlier, which are for the benefit of municipalities but implemented on their behalf by the national departments administering those conditional grants. So for indirect transfers, we have 7 billion in 24-25, and then for infrastructure, from that 7 billion, we have 6.9 billion in terms of infrastructure, and then for capacity building, just about 145 million. So that brings the total package in terms of transfers to local government to 177.3 billion for the 24-25 MTF. And then obviously we have the outer year allocations, which is your 25-26 and 26-27, which conditional grants are growing at 5.2%, and then equitable share X 6.1. Next slide, please. So in terms of the equitable share, as we would all know, the equitable share is allocated through a formula so as to ensure fairness amongst the 257 municipalities that we have in the country. And then the formula is updated on an annual basis with data as far as tariff increases for bulk water and bulk electricity is concerned, and then obviously with the projected CPI for any other costs that municipalities incur in the delivery of services. So as far as your bulk water tariff increase is concerned, for bulk water, the proposed or the percentage increase is 10.8% average across the water boards, and then 12.7% average increase as determined through the multi-year price determination. And then the formula fully funds an estimated 11.2 million poor households that we have in the country. So it's very important to note that the equitable share is in the main to cater for the provision of basic services to the poor households that we have in the country. And then going into details as far as the formula is concerned, the formula is made up of 3 components, with the main component being the free basic services component, which is to the tune of 76.1 billion. And then this caters for an amount of 567 rands, 0.12 cents per month as a package to assist with the provision of free basic services to the poor households in the country, which I indicated earlier. And then this amount is determined using the old age pensions grant, to say the households that we determine as poor is households that have an income of less than 2 old age pension grant per month. And then we also have the institutional component, which has an amount of 6.9 billion in it to assist municipalities with administration costs. And then we also have the community services component of the equitable share formula, which has 10.4 billion to fund your community services that municipalities need to undertake. However, with respect to the institutional and community services components, the House must just note that these funds are only allocated to the poorer municipalities in the country, in the sense that municipalities have different levels of raising revenue. So your more affluent municipalities are expected to raise the bulk of their own revenue. Hence, these funds are only allocated to the poorer municipalities. And then, as I indicated as well, to say there's also 1.1 billion within the equitable share, which is to assist with the cost of councillor remuneration and ward committee. So that basically sums up the equitable share formula as far as the allocation of funds to municipalities is concerned. And then in terms of reductions, given the fiscal consolidation phase that we're in as government due to the prolonged slow economic growth and other factors that are happening in the country, there had to be proposed reductions to allocations to municipalities in the medium-term budget policy statement. However, it's important to note that some of these proposed reductions have fortunately been reversed, starting with your general fuel levy sharing with metropolitan municipalities. There was a proposed reduction of 5.1 billion, but that has since been reversed, meaning the cities will now receive that 5.1 billion in their budgets. And then also there were previous reductions proposed to the Integrated National Electrification Program grant, mainly for the electrification of households, as well as other electricity infrastructure such as your substations. And then there was also proposed reductions to the Municipal Disaster Response Grant and the Municipal Systems Improvement Grant. And these as well, from the proposed reductions, they have been revised downwards, given the needs that are there in municipalities, and also the fact that certain parts of the country appear to be more prone to disasters. So we needed to then replenish the Municipal Disaster Response Grant in order for us to be able to assist municipalities to timely respond to disasters as and when they occur. However, despite the reversal of some of the reductions, there were still reductions to allocations to municipalities. This was in the main to make funds available for other more pressing government priorities. And then these reductions have been made to some of the municipal grants over the 2024 MTEF, and then they include a reduction of 3.5 billion to the indirect integrated electrification program, which is your indirect grant to municipalities for electrification, whereby ESCOM is the implementing agent. And then there's also been a reduction of 852 million to the indirect component of the regional bulk infrastructure grant. And then there have also been conversions, which is your movement of funds between the direct and indirect component of conditional grants, meaning it's simply the movement of funds between the two components of the conditional grants, and not necessarily a loss in the sense that either way, the intended beneficiaries are still going to benefit. It's only the modalities in terms of the delivery to say, in some instances, it's no longer going to be the municipality concerned that is going to implement, but rather the national department on behalf of that municipality. And then in that sense, there's 58.58 million in 24-25 that is being converted from the indirect component of the municipal infrastructure grant to the indirect component of the municipal infrastructure grant. And then there's also an amount of 587 million that is shifted from the direct component of the regional bulk infrastructure grant to the indirect component of the same grant. And then there have also been reprioritizations and additions to conditional grants, whereby an amount of 1.5 billion was shifted into the municipal disaster recovery grant, which is to assist municipalities to repair and reconstruct municipal infrastructure following damages by disasters. Which bodes well for municipalities which, if it happens they are affected by disasters and infrastructure is damaged, will be able to then avail funding for them to be able to repair or reconstruct that infrastructure in order for continued service delivery in those municipalities. And then 2 billion is also shifted to fund the baseline for the new conditional grant, your smart meters grant, which will provide details in the next slide. And then we also have 650 million that is added to the 24-25 neighborhood development conditional grant to fund your city's public employment program, which is also solely for the metropolitan municipalities in the country, of which Cape Town is a beneficiary. And then as far as the smart meters grant is concerned, it is to be introduced in the 24-25 financial year, and the grant will be administered by the National Treasury as part of the revenue management stream of the National Treasury, which aims to enhance revenue collection in municipalities. And then the initial focus of this grant is going to be solely on the municipalities that are on the municipal debt relief program, but will, as time progresses, be rolled out to the rest of the municipalities in the country. And then the envisaged benefits of this new conditional grant is that we expect that there will be timely and accurate billing, in the sense that it will be prepaid meters in the main, whereby people will then be buying electricity and the municipalities will be receiving immediate revenue, as opposed to the conventional way of doing things, where municipalities would provide services and then people would have to then pay come the end of the month. And then we also hope this grant will assist in the reduction of technical and non-technical losses in municipalities, as far as the provision of service charges or your electricity and water distribution losses is concerned. And we also hope it will bring a better and overall management of the electricity and water business through improved system integrations or visibility, as well as control measures that we hope this grant will bring. And also the main is to ensure that there is a sustainable delivery of electricity and water in municipalities, as well as efficient trading services that are cost reflective and self-sustainable, because sustainability is key in the delivery of services. And then there's other reforms in local government as well, as far as your trading services are concerned, which is in the main your water, sanitation, electricity, and solid waste space. And then city trading services performance has been noted to be on a declining spiral, hence the need for these proposed reforms. And this declining performance in the trading services space has mainly been driven by underinvestment in infrastructure, your loss of management and skills in those spaces, and as well as governance and leadership challenges in some of the municipalities in the country, as well as to some extent poor incentives in the grants to leverage sustained performance. So as far as incentivizing municipalities that are doing well, we felt that we haven't been doing well in that space. And also the declining levels of service delivery in the country has necessitated this reform, especially in cities, because this undermines South Africa's economic growth and social transformation agenda, given they are the engines of economic growth in the country, since they account for more than 60% of our GDP. So National Treasury, in collaboration with key sectors, is facilitating the design of a program which is aimed at financing incentives within local government to facilitate the implementation, the institutional reform and investments that are needed to turn around the urban trading services in municipalities. And then the implementation is envisaged to start in 24-25, whereby cities will be expected to come up with turnaround strategies for the trading services, which is water, sanitation, electricity, and waste business. And then in order for them to be eligible for the new grant that will be effective in 25-26. So we also enhancing the usage of regulatory frameworks in conditional grant system. And here we'll be using the results of the Department of Water and Sanitation's watch reports in the prioritization of water and sanitation projects, which will be funded from the general purpose grants, such as your Urban Settlements Development Grant, your Integrated Urban Development Grant, and the Municipal Infrastructure Grant. And then from the 24-25 financial year, municipalities will be required to ensure that the results of the green drop, blue drop, and no drop assessment are considered in the planning and prioritization of water and sanitation projects in the Integrated Urban Development Grant and the Municipal Infrastructure Grant. Next slide, please. So, Chair, this is basically the equitable share allocation to Western Cape municipalities over the 24-25 MTEF. I won't necessarily go through the individual allocations, but from the slide, we can see City of Cape Town gets the bulk of the funding from the equitable share, given the size of the municipality and the population of the municipalities, and then the rest goes to all the other municipalities in the province. So that's just a continuation of the equitable share allocations. And then this slide, Chair, is the conditional grants allocations to Western Cape municipalities, which is both your direct and indirect conditional grants, where your infrastructure grants are to the tune of 6.5 billion. And then indirect transfers for infrastructure amount to 134.9 million. And then from a capacity building perspective, there's 217.8 million, which will be disbursed to municipalities or for their benefit of municipalities in the Western Cape, where direct transfers are 207.9 million and the indirect transfers are 9.9, and then bringing us to the total allocation of 6.7 billion in 24-25 in conditional grants to Western Cape, and then obviously with the outer allocations as well. Next slide. And then here, Chair, it's basically the performance of Western Cape municipalities as far as conditional grants are concerned, which is the past 3 financial years from 2020, 21, and 21-22, and then 2022-23. And then as far as the performance is concerned, from an infrastructure perspective, the Western Cape municipalities have been spending on average 70% of their allocations, and then on capacity building 77.4, and then which gives us the average performance on conditional grants of 70.5% for Western Cape municipalities in 2020-21. And then we noted an increased spending, where spending on average increased to 80.8%. However, in 2022-23, there was a decline in conditional grants performance to 75%. But I would assume this is driven mainly by the increased allocations to municipalities in Western Cape, particularly the City of Cape Town, which received funding from the budget facility for infrastructure to the tune of billions. But it's a worry in the sense that we are seeing a decline in terms of conditional grants performance, which obviously needs intervention to ensure that the funds that get allocated to our municipalities are spent for the benefit of the intended beneficiaries. I think this will be my last slide, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, with that, I'm now opening up for questions. Okay, if there are no hands, then okay, I see a hand going up. Member van der Westhuizen, you may go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. If I may just ask a few questions. In an early slide, you referred to the increase in the debt service costs, and I think you said that is the biggest increase or the fastest increasing expenditure for South Africa. Perhaps if you could just share with us what are the main cost drivers? Is it the weakening of the rand, the fact that we are borrowing more and more? Are international finance organizations increasing our interest rates because they believe that our risk profile is increasing? If you could just expand on that, please. Then on slide 7, the changes in the legislation, there you refer to the receiving officer changing the allocated amount, particularly referring there to the Human Settlements Development Grant. Now, my fear is just that, this will again result in a case where promises are made. People are said, well, this is the amount allocated. This is what's going to be invested or spent in your area. We're going to build so many houses. But then this amount may be changed downwards. Perhaps if you could just explain to me somewhat what the reasons would be for the changing that amount, but then also how will the communication be in that regard. Then in slide 12, Chair, and then I'll stop. This is about halfway through my questions. I've got a layman's understanding of the difference between conditional grants and equitable share grants, but then also I do see that some provinces are, in terms of the general percentage, which seems to be about the conditional grant is about a fifth in most cases of the money received by provinces. But there are provinces where the conditional grant is quite high in relation to the overall money transfer to those provinces. Perhaps if you could just explain to me, why that is the case, and how can a province ensure that they receive the maximum amount for conditional grants from the fiscus. I'll first stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to have a look here. I don't see any other hands. So, Member van der Westhuizen, you can conclude your questions. I'll keep mine for the next round.
Thank you very much. Then on slide 17, my note is just that you are referring to reductions on the reductions, which means that the reductions will no longer be as severe. Is that my understanding? That's on slide 17. Then slide 22, you refer there to support to certain municipalities, and you've said that the affluent municipalities will not be receiving that kind of support. Now, I'm always concerned about the system where the incentive to perform is taken away. And I'm concerned that we might say, well, some municipalities are affluent municipalities when they are actually high-performing municipalities, and now they no longer receive grants. Can you please, allay that fear of mine? Because I have seen in many cases where some public officials just have this expectation that government will have to come with bailouts, when we don't perform well. The public is suffering, and if we don't pay our Eskom accounts, eventually a lot of that will be written off. Or we've seen that in Gauteng now with the e-toll system. We didn't want to pay, we boycotted the whole system, we didn't make a success of implementing this, and now the Gauteng government will only pay for 1/3 of the costs. The other 2/3 will be paid by the rest of the country in terms of the debts on the Gauteng Freeway project. How can we turn that around where people fail and then they are, I almost want to say, incentivized for their failures? And then on slide 23, may I say, in slide 24, I think you've got your finger on the pulse when you say that municipal trading services are declining due to an underinvestment in infrastructure. But then on slide 23, you point out that there will be reductions in the bulk infrastructure grant and also in the electrification program. So again, it seems to me we realize the problem is a decline in infrastructure, but on the other hand, we are reducing the exact grant that is supposed to turn around the declining trading services. And then what I find interesting is that, for example, on page 23, you give a very nice motivation for municipal infrastructure recovery grants, where you've said, and I think we all know that some areas in South Africa is more prone to natural disasters, but you do not give a motivation why the bulk infrastructure grant or the electrification program have been reduced. If you could just perhaps explain to us the rationale why that particular grant has been decreasing. And then the last one is just some of these reductions, for example, on slide 17, where you give us the medium-term view, it seems to me, and please correct me if I'm not right, but we are talking for the next few years of reductions on reductions. So it's not only this year that is predicted to be a reduction in grants, but that the knife will cut even deeper in years to come. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much.
Chairperson, I don't know where to press. Chairperson, sorry.
Hi.
I don't know where to press so that I can put up my hand. Is Honorable Moss.
Welcome, Honorable Moss. You may go ahead.
Thank you so much. And sorry for the inconveniences, Chairperson. Mine is actually on the issue of the electricity infrastructure. Now, my question is, who is responsible for the infrastructure of street lights and street poles and so forth? We know this issue of load shedding is a disaster, and for it also under disaster management. When it comes to this thing that people steal the cables and so forth and so forth. If I can just get clarity on that, because we can foresee that people stay for 4 or 5 years without proper electrification. Secondly, on the issue on the free basic service, you talk about bulk water, bulk electricity, but if we look in certain areas in cities, people are without water. Infrastructure was never serviced for many, many years. And now the municipalities, or not to say the municipality, the people sit with it, with that disaster in the area where they cannot have drinking water. And drinking water is a human right to the human beings. So why are we giving money for infrastructure or even for the repairs of infrastructure, but they are not using the money of infrastructure for that purpose, but they're using it for salaries and so forth and so forth. My last point, Chairperson, is on the issue of the potholes in most municipalities. Who is responsible for the streets and the roads of the municipality if we talk about infrastructure? Because that falls also under infrastructure. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you so much. I do know usually we ask these questions to the NCOP because it is a national bill that is given to us. I know the NA and the NCOP also have their own DORA meetings, but I will take those questions. Mr. Pakkies, over to you and the delegation.
Thanks a lot, Honorable Chair, and thanks to the honorable members for the questions. I'm gonna invite my colleagues to come in first. There were questions that were specific to the slides, and then I'll just tie it up at the end, Honorable Chair. So if we can start with you, Olorato, to deal with the issues around the bill clauses, what we're trying to do there. Over to you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and honorable members. I think maybe just to provide clarity on I think it was reference to slide 7 specifically, the amendments to section 12, which would regulate the allocations for 80507 allocations. So currently, then the clause make provision that in the event that the receiving officers, this is in the instance of the Human Settlements Development Grant as well as the Informal Settlements Upgrading Partnership Grant. So these grants then are transferred to, in the event that the provinces would want to utilize the municipalities then to specifically municipalities with level 1 or 2 accreditation to deliver on these functions, then they are required then to publish a gazette of the allocations that would flow then to these municipalities. And then I also mentioned that within that particular clause, an amendment then is also made to the clause that would make provision to an amendment to those allocations that would be published in the Gazette. I think I just want to clarify that it is not just an automatic process where a province would just then decide that they are no longer going to make the allocation to the specific municipalities. They would have to take into consideration the performance of the municipality. So it is under specific conditions then where the province as the receiving officer would actually then make that amendment. They would have to take certain instances or conditions into consideration before that amendment can take place. And I think what I also want to highlight is that the reason why even these allocations then or the provinces are required to publish these allocations in a gazette is so that the municipalities actually then have certainty that they would receive those amounts for them to be able to deliver on that function, which then mitigates the concern that the honorable member was raising with regard to the issue of, the municipalities being a commitment being made that they will receive the money and then not necessarily receiving it. So the Gazette makes it official or legal that they have to receive those funds, but then the clause also in this particular section makes provision that before then, an amendment to those gazetted allocations can be made, there would have to be several situations or instances taken into consideration. And one of those then would be then if the municipalities then don't necessarily perform in accordance to what is required in terms of the grant or the implementation of the function, then the receiving officer would then consider then making an amendment to those allocations that would be gazetted. But it's not necessarily an automatic process, and it is a process then that is also regulated by the bill so that we can mitigate for the concerns that the honorable member then was raising. I think maybe just to touch on the issue that the honorable member also raised with regard to the allocations that are made in general to conditional grants. I think the honorable member was drawing comparison to the provincial equitable share allocations. I think what would be important to also highlight or emphasize there is that with the conditional grant allocations, the grants specifically then are administered by the transferring officers within the different sectors, and they would then be responsible for identifying what it is that they are addressing or targeting through the conditional grants and how that particular intervention then needs to be addressed in the respective provinces. And that is the discretion or the rationale or the approach first lies then with the transferring officer in determining then how the intervention is best addressed within a particular province. And then that's how then the funds would then be allocated to the respective provinces, and it is obviously sector specific and also very program specific. I also want to highlight the fact that obviously there is a constraint within the current environment in terms of the funds that are available, but how the allocations that are made is with regard to then how the intervention
I just want to check, Ms. Ola, you're just breaking up a little bit.
My apologies, Chair, but I think I'll get a response that I wanted to give.
No problem. Do you want to quickly check? Mr. Pakis, are there any other responses you want to deal with still?
Yes, just to add on this one, Honorable Chair, but I'll still ask Mandla and Marvin to come in on the others. So there's also, I think over the years, we've tried to institutionalize the use of incentives in the system. So they also play a part in terms of, access to resources. So the better you perform in terms of the variables that would have been chosen, to inform that allocation, you would then get a higher allocation in terms of those particular grants. So isn't, sometimes you can apply and be eligible for all the grants in the system that are available to you as a province, but also there's then the performance that needs to then ensure that you also get into the incentive. So we have a few conditional grants that use incentive in those provinces that perform much better than others would then get funding from that pot as well. Just while I'm here, Honorable Chair, maybe I should just address maybe I should.
Apologies, I'm just quickly going to mute everyone else.
Okay.
Let me just have a look here. Thank you. Mr. Pakis, you can continue.
Okay, no, thanks, Honorable Chair. So they also just the issues that were raised around the growing debt service costs and what that is attributed to. I think the honourable member correctly pointed out that it could be a combination of factors. Yes, indeed, it is a combination of factors. Firstly, from the global outlook. Also other countries are not growing as well as they were previously expected. Then that affects us as well in many other ways. As these are our trading partners, so changes in those spaces also would then obviously affect us as well. The exchange rate is also an issue that comes in. There's lower households consumption expenditure due to inflation and interest rates, lower net exports, and obviously I think the honourable members would be appreciative of the reprieve that we're getting now in terms of the load shedding, which should be strange because we're celebrating something that really shouldn't be celebrated, because we should as a country try and deal with the issue of power cuts quite decisively, but those have made an impact in terms of our ability to increase our growth. The Transnet's declining rail performance has also threatened our economy. So issues around the operational failures there, vandalism, the infrastructure conditions, so all these factors, together, they then, derail us in terms of our growth prospects. And then we find ourselves in a situation where we actually have deficits, and we have to then continuously go and borrow, in order to be able to then, maintain the level of service that we have. So those combination of factors really have led to the situation that we're in. I wanna touch just quickly. I'm still gonna call on Mandla and Marvin to speak to the specific slides that are being referred to here. But I wanted to reflect maybe on one of the slides we shared with the honorable members today, especially right towards the end, where we were talking about the performance in terms of these various conditional grants. Marvin went through that slide. There's an issue that needs to be made, or a point that needs to be made about the performance. Yes, the performance is not that bad, but in reality, it does show room for improvement across these conditional grants. So take a look at the USDG, for instance, which is the Urban Settlement Grant, which only the city of Cape Town is benefiting from in terms of this province. If you look at the performance there, 50 in the first year of the 3 years we've shown there, growing to 65. We appreciate that, but pretty stagnant at 65 in the last financial year, which is 22-23. Now, when we speak about the issues, then, honorable members, in terms of the trading services, the water infrastructure, these are the pots of funds that should be assisting us to be able to address those issues. And what this is telling us then is that the problems are not just of a financial nature. There are also other issues that go beyond that. Therefore, the reductions that have been made, they've been made with that in mind, that there's also some of the concerted effort that obviously needs to be put into these sectors to try and drive, and correct the wrongs that are not going right in terms of the trading services. But that, there is space, for reductions that could then be reprioritized to other areas. For instance, if we look at what is happening in the electricity space, we're really quite proud of what we've been able to achieve in terms of connections. So we're 95%, which is on universal access and providing universal access in electricity as a country, which is a really great thing, even in comparison with the world at large. And here then, because of that, there was scope to then reprioritize some funding to then fund other emerging issues. So if you look at how that money is mainly used, it's been reprioritized to create a baseline which also assists in terms of the electricity sector, because there are a number of water and electricity losses that as a country we're experiencing. So having these bidimensional smart meters, would not only just help in terms of the billing process, but also it just brings the credibility in the system and also controlling the losses that we're experiencing there. So indirectly, these funds have been plowed back into the system to assist with issues that are related to these trading services as well. But it doesn't take away the many challenges that as a country we're grappling with in terms of the trading services that we still need to then try and address. Amanda, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pakis. I think what I'm going to do, you have largely covered me and Olorado. What I wanted to just amplify also on top of what you said on conditional grant, in terms of how provinces can ensure that they increase their allocation in terms of conditional grants. You've dealt with the issue of incentives, but also I think what is very important also is to protect the province against the reallocation of funds away from the province, and that is mainly based on the performance. And I think in the past we have seen the Western Cape actually benefiting from the reallocation from other provinces because of the performance. And I think it's something that would want to say for Western Cape to make sure that they protect even the little that is being allocated to them. It is actually to continue with the basis of performance. That is the first one that I wanted to touch. On slide 17, there is a question, I think it's two questions there. The first one relates to the severity in terms of the cuts, and the other one relates to the cut over the MTF. Yes, I think when you look at the cuts, whichever way you look at the cuts, they have a severe impact in terms of what needs to happen in terms of service delivery in the province. What I would want to say that actually we tried to do was actually to cushion the province in terms of the cut. If you remember in one of the slides, I made mention that we first made an allocation of 68 billion over the MTF to cover the issues of wage. But subsequent to the budget process engagements, obviously, we then realize the deep impacts that obviously the provision of the COE from other items of the departments, the impact that it has. Then we further cushioned to lessen that impact in terms of the cuts. That's why we ended up having now the net effect of 19.3 billion, particularly that being more on equitable share. So what we have actually tried to do was actually to cushion that reduction. So yes, it is severe, but at least it is now being cushioned to be moderate. When it comes to the issue of cut over the MTF, yes, you have read the slide correctly, that the cut is actually going to be through the MTF, and when you look at the cut will actually be more in the second year and in the outer year. But obviously this relates to 2024 MTF, and I think obviously what will happen to the 2025 MTF, I think we'll have to see then. But this is the current cut as actually reflected. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I just want to quickly check if there are any other outstanding responses, Mr. Pakis.
Yes, Chair. Marvin, do you want to speak to the institutional component as well as the potholes and the streetlights comments from the honorable member? Over to you, please.
All right. Thanks, Chair and Dr. Pakis. I think let me start with there was a question on slide 12 where a question was raised to say what's the difference between the equitable share and conditional grants. So the difference in the main is that the equitable share, it's funding that gets allocated to municipalities, which is an unconditional transfer to municipalities to assist them with the provision of basic services, as we tried to emphasize on the slide on the equitable share formula. And it's in terms of the constitution that we have to allocate the equitable share to municipalities. And then conditional grants are specific purpose grants whereby these funds are allocated for a specific purpose. So with your equitable share, there's a level of flexibility in terms of which area of their function or powers do municipalities want to prioritize. But as far as conditional grants are concerned, they are there for a specific purpose. Like, for example, we have the Integrated National Electrification Grant. That grant is specifically to address electrification issues in municipalities. So that's in the main the difference between the two. And then there was also a point raised to say conditional grants transfers are higher than equitable share in some instances, and then how can municipalities then maximize on conditional grants? So the equitable share, as we indicated, it's allocated through a formula. So there wouldn't necessarily be a guideline or anything of sorts to say the equitable share must be higher than conditional grants, because conditional grants are for specific purposes, and it depends on the the needs assessment that is done in the different municipalities, and they would obviously always fluctuate based on whether those needs are being addressed or not, because we can't be allocating the electrification grant to municipalities whereby, for example, they've eradicated all the electrification backlogs. So obviously their allocations would be higher to municipalities with higher backlogs, and obviously little or no allocations to municipalities that have little or no backlogs. And then the other question was on the equitable share components, to say why are we then disadvantaging affluent municipalities in the institutional and community services component of the equitable share? So the bulk of the funding, as we indicated, it's allocated through the free basic services component, which in the main is to cover all poor households in the country, irrespective of where those households are located in the country. It can be in Cape Town, or it can be in Swellendam, or anywhere. But we're covering the provision of the free basic services to those poor households. But then, as far as the institutional and community services components are concerned, this is to bring about equity in the municipalities, and trying to ensuring that all municipalities, from an administrative point of view, they are able to put systems and people in place to be able to deliver on the basic services that we're funding through the free basic services component. So in the main, that is why we only allocating to poorer households. And I also indicated that it's not that to say we are necessarily disadvantaging the other municipalities. We expect those municipalities to be able to raise more revenue, given that they have more or they have less poor households in their area. So obviously they have people who are then able to pay for services. So there should be that element of cross subsidization there as well. So in the main, that is that. And as we indicated, that funding is allocated through the formula. And then the other question was on electricity, to say who's responsible for street lights and street poles, given there's issues of cable theft and whatnot. So these ordinarily would be the responsibility of the municipalities concerned, in the sense that provision of street lights and the maintenance thereof is the responsibility of municipalities. I'm not sure in terms of the street poles if we're referring to the poles or for the electricity lines, but if that is the case, it depends on who's responsible for electricity in that particular space, because there are instances where Eskom is responsible for the provision of electricity, and if it's an Eskom line, it would then be Eskom who's responsible for that. But then if it's the municipality that's providing electricity and it's their line, then they will be responsible for the provision as well as the upkeep there as well. And then there was also a question on bulk water and electricity, to say in some cities, as much as we're providing funding to municipalities to provide water and electricity, we find that there's no water due to neglect of the infrastructure. So why are we giving funds for the repair of the infrastructure if the funds are not used for that and they are used for salaries? It goes back to what I indicated in the equitable share, to say there's a bit of flexibility there in terms of municipalities to say what are they prioritizing in their budget. So it's a prioritization issue, because most of the infrastructure that is failing is due to neglect and non-investment in that infrastructure, because that very infrastructure is the infrastructure that is providing services, which for households and businesses and other state institutions that receive those services, they are expected to pay for those services, and we expect municipalities to collect from all these stakeholders who are able to pay for the services. So there's issues around non-collection or non-enforcement of your debt policies in municipalities, which obviously will lead to a reduction in the revenues of municipalities, and obviously a reduction in monies that can be then be budgeted for repairs and maintenance of infrastructure, and sometimes even refurbishment and renewal of the infrastructure. And then lastly, there was a question on roads, to say we have potholes in our roads, and then who's responsible for our streets and our roads. So here as well, it's an issue of powers and functions, to say, in terms of the roads, is it a national road? Is it a provincial road? Is it a district or a local road? So it depends on the ownership of that road, to say who is the owner of the road, and then whoever the owner of that particular road is responsible for the upkeep as far as repairs and maintenance and renewal of those roads is concerned. So of which, through the Division of Revenue Act, we do provide funding to all three levels of government to maintain their roads infrastructure. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much. Let me just quickly check. Mr. Pakis, are all of the respective persons have gone through their questions? On my side, I think everything has been answered.
Yes, Chair, we have. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Colleagues, I'm going to open up for the next round of questions. Member van der Westhuizen. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I'll then go after Member van der Westhuizen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know this may be slightly off topic, but the whole issue of electricity distribution is a very interesting one, which obviously also, has an effect on the finances, both on the income and expenditure of local governments. And we do have, as was quite rightly explained, still vast areas that are being serviced by Eskom itself, even residential areas, neighborhoods, which rely on Eskom and buy their electricity from Eskom, and where Eskom is taking the responsibility for street lighting, etc. And it's still an outstanding issue, I believe, which need to be addressed, as Eskom is not politically accountable to those local governments, whereas those neighborhoods, vote for specific political parties or representatives, which they can then hold responsible for the level of service delivery, etc. So thank you very much for that explanation. And I believe, I come from an era 20 years ago when we had huge debates regarding regional electricity distributors, etc. And eventually the decision was for those services to remain with local governments. But as I've said, some areas still need to be transferred, and quite frankly, some of those boundaries are not even in line with municipal demarcated areas. Whereas quite recently, I know that an area such as Pinel and Kaalmoor, between Stellenbosch and Drakenstein, which forms part of Stellenbosch, was still serviced by Drakenstein. Can I just ask, Chair, my question regarding the drivers of the increases in the debt servicing costs? I think I may have missed some of the explanation there. As I've said, is it the fact that we are still, borrowing more money? And if I may say, my personal view is that, to live off borrowed money, when you spend that money on infrastructure such as the building of dams, or I'm now taking part in this meeting very close from the Clan William Dam, which, for example, will unlock vast job opportunities, vast economic growth, etc. And we know there are other provinces, Eastern Cape with the Umzimvubu irrigation possibilities, etc. So for me to go and borrow money to invest in long-term infrastructure that will unlock huge economic potential is quite acceptable. But to borrow money for your running expenses, can I call it your household expenditure, is irresponsible. So to what extent are we borrowing for, can I call it the right reasons, and to what extent are we living off borrowed money for your kind of current expenses? That would be my first question. The second one, Chair, is we experience every year this problem that the budget cycle and the public service salary negotiations seem to be out of sync with one another. My expectation would be that you first negotiate and then you draft your budget in accordance with what has just been negotiated and the implications, because that would allow Treasury to really budget more carefully and not having to play, can I call it, catch up, or every time being found with pants down, where they go into the negotiations and say, well, we've budgeted for a 4% increase, and eventually the negotiators come out with a 7% agreement. And then every time entities such as provinces, but also national departments are being caught off guard in terms of what is otherwise a very carefully drafted budget. Are there any plans to try and change that cycle, or the timing of those cycles in the public service? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Mr. Swart from Salga.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. My first question was actually, the one that Van Westhuizen just alluded to, because I didn't also get the answer on his first question, and that is also my worry on the debt service cost. My second question would be, I didn't see, maybe I missed it somewhere. I see all the grants, distributed between the provinces and municipalities. And for me, always as person, money doesn't make, right, that is wrong. For me, it's all about, the political will to serve the people of this country. And I didn't see, as I said, I maybe missed it, how much money has been distributed to provinces and municipalities or metros for capacity building. Because, when I open a paper, when I see it on TV, it's our municipalities, and that is where service delivery is happening. Poverty in our country is a challenge. It's getting worse by the day. People are struggling. Infrastructure is getting, that's also a challenge. My question is, how much do we spend on capacity building? Politicians who drive these issues in different municipalities, and that has a direct impact on the livelihood of our people. And since 1994, this word, a better tomorrow. And we are responsible as leadership in municipalities and in government to make that happen. And it can only be happened when, when we have capacitated people in all spheres of government. So it's for me, it's capacity building, and I just want to see how much we spend on capacity building, because it's not getting better, it's getting worse by the day, according to me, and people on the ground level are suffering. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to add mine now as well, because there weren't too many questions posed. So Member America, Member America, I must be missing him, shame. Member van der Westhuizen and Mr. Swart referred to the drivers of debt costs. What I would like to know is, what are we doing to manage it? Because it's all fine and well if we're noting the fact that the debt service costs are increasing and if we know what the driving factors are, but what exactly are we going to do? Because quite frankly, colleagues, we cannot sell off our gold every single year. Secondly, in terms of the census data, when will those data points be phased in? I know there was a slide regarding saying that it's not being phased in just yet, but if we can please get a timeline, or if they are being phased in at different phases, if we can get a timeline of when the respective data points will be phased in. You will notice that the Western Cape is the third largest province when it comes to people now, but we are still the fifth biggest and the fifth smallest in terms of the equitable share formula specifically. And as we all know, the population figures play a big part in the change of the equitable share formula. Then previously, in terms of, now I'm going to reference different meetings, if you don't mind, so if everyone just bears with me. In previous education meetings, National Treasury came to present to the Education Committee that it is not committed to funding the Bella Bill, it has not budgeted for the Bella Bill is not currently in DORA, and so on. Now, the Bella Bill, according to the DBE, is calculated on a formula of 1 teacher to 40 learners, but the norms and standards says actually it must be 1 to 35, even though the average is 1 to 29, if I remember correctly, in our province. And there's also uncosted items that is not in the bill, such as nutrition, transport, and special education needs matters. Now, given that National Treasury already knows what DBE is going to be asking if this bill is passed, and given that National Treasury has previously indicated that it has not committed to funding the Bella Bill, has National Treasury added the Bella Bill to its fiscal risk register? Now, here in our province, we have risk registers because you must know how something might affect you in the future, because that is good planning. Has the National Treasury added the Bella Bill to its fiscal risk register? Because 17.7 billion rand is not just going to appear, and that is an underestimation of what the bill would cost if it was passed according to the B bill. Then next, I wanted to check, there's a slide that referred to section 16, subsection 2, subsection C of the bill that is changing, where the National Treasury must publish a notice in the Gazette of a shift of funds in terms of paragraph B. And paragraph B refers to the transferring officer may shift funds from one component to another relating to conditional grants. So I just want to understand, what does this mean? Is it within the conditional grant component? Does that mean if you get something in your conditional grant and one project is not completed, that you can move it to another project? Because when you look at the last slide of the local government grants, and I'm just, sorry, you must just bear with me regarding my different references. So you will see at the local government grants that were sent, that majority of them are actually in the 90 and 80% of expenditure. And I think there were 3 grants that were bringing the average down. One of those grants were the urban grant. And yes, if you can just quickly go to that slide for me, please. One of those were the urban grant, yes. So we'll see, sorry, let me also just make sure I can make this bigger on my side. The municipal grant is over 90%, the integrated urban is over 90, you have your informal one over 70, public transport over 18, and so on and so on. There's 1, 2, 3 grants under 70%. And if I can just reference the urban one quickly. So my understanding of it from the city, and I quickly just messaged the maker member of the city in this regard to try and understand. And from what it seems is, as at 15 April, the city spent 60% of its annual allocation and 78% of its planned cash flow. Then the city on the 13th of March 2024, which was a little bit more than a month ago, requested from the National Department of Human Settlements to allow it to move funds from underperforming projects, mainly due to security, to high-performing projects. But after a month, the city is still waiting for the National Department to respond, and there's been a delay of more than 1 month. Further, it's from my understanding, the city manager wrote to the National Department of Human Settlements yesterday. Yesterday is the 17th of April, asking for the approval of the updated business plan that will allow the city to thus spend the additional money. And the example, from my understanding, is that there's a road where the contractors were chased off the site, and they thus want to then spend the money on a different road project in the meantime, while the security matters are attended to. So this relates again back to that section 16, whether it is then possible for municipalities and or metros, I think with this particular one, it's metro specifically, can you then in that conditional grant component within this new section in the bill, if we can just go to section 16, please. I think it was Ms. Hela, sorry, I think I'm saying your surname incorrectly, that was speaking about the different section changes. So 16 to 2C, let me just, yes, it's there. So there's that first section. Yes. So does that mean where municipalities and or a metro in this specific case can then within the conditional grant move money from the one component to another one, and then it, as per the clause, then gets gazetted after obviously National Treasury has agreed to it, or in this regard, the National Department of Human Settlements? I just need a little bit of clarity in that regard as to operationally, how will it happen? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chair. I'm gonna again invite maybe Olorado, you should start. And then maybe the colleagues can then come back. I will again try to deal with the issues of around the debt and the plans that the country has. And perhaps we can also hear from the provincial treasurer. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Chair. So it actually then appears on the slide. I was going to mention then that section 16 subsection 2A mentions that a framework may provide for components within a conditional grant that are subject to specific conditions. And I think maybe let me first say that where this practically actually happens is within the provincial conditional grants mainly. So an example, for example, is within the health sector, we have a conditional grant called the District Health Programs Grant, and there are two components within that specific conditional grant. And in essence, then what the provision of the clause then states is that then within that conditional grant, so to respond to the question from the chairperson, the movements would be within a conditional grant that has specific components. So in the example that I mentioned, within that specific conditional grants, then the transferring officer or this section then makes provision that the transferring officer then may shift locations within the conditional grants. But obviously then the clauses within then subsection 2 or within section 16 then would stipulate then the conditions around how those funds then may be shifted. With regard to the amendment that we're making is that then there would be a requirement for that shift to be gazetted. And what we are actually then adding is that the shift of the allocations comes into effect when the gazette is actually then published. So I think I just wanted to clarify that it would be within the conditional grant. So you find conditional grants where there is a split of the conditional grant into components, and the transferring officer or the administrator of the grant then would want to shift allocations within that specific conditional grant. And the practical case of where this kind of takes place mainly is within the provincial conditional grant system, where we do have a number of conditional grants that operate with components within the conditional grant. Thanks.
Thanks, Olorato. Manda, okay, over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think I will respond to some of the questions. I think number one, it has to do with the alignment of the budget process and the wage agreement. Yes, I think National Treasury has been trying to do that, to make sure that there is an alignment between the budget process and the negotiation. And our unit, the public sector remuneration, is actually working on this one. I think what makes it more difficult is when there is no multi-year agreement, because when there is multi-year agreement, at least we know for the next year how much we have actually been budgeted for, and it becomes very easier to allocate. Just to answer to say that National Treasury also, that's what they are looking into this and trying to make sure that the issue of the wage negotiations is actually aligned to the budget process, to make also the budget estimations very easier. I think when it comes to, there's a question also with regard to the census data and the required time frame. I think with the consultations that took place with the intergovernmental forums, was that the wish is to actually implement it in the 2025 MTF, and as such, there are engagements that are taking place between National Treasury and States SA to ensure that the required data to update the formula is available before determining the allocation for the next MTF. So that is obviously what National Treasury wants to do, but I think it will depend on States SA if the information is actually available. But what I know is that there is that discussion taking place. When it comes to the Bella Bill, Chair, I think you are correct. When it comes to the Bella Bill, there is no provision for the Bella Bill in the division of revenue, and obviously once the bill then has been passed, obviously there will be that discussion also between the Department of Basic Education and the National Treasury through the budget process to determine in terms of the allocation that should be provided them. And you are asking a question regarding the fiscal risk register, if that has been included in the National Treasury's fiscal risk register. That I'm not in a position to say yes or no, Chair. If you don't mind, is something that maybe we can provide, because we'll have to check with the people that are responsible for making that. So yes, I think those were three questions, Dr. Pakis, that I wanted to respond to. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. I just want us to give the honorable members comfort around the States SA data and the letters that have been returned to States SA and the meetings that are gonna ensue to help us get to the bottom of the sequencing of the information and how those will be phased in. Olorato, do you wanna add on that one?
Yes, I want to just reiterate, I guess, what Mandla has mentioned, that through consultations where provinces were also then included in those consultations, it was thought that it would be best for us to use the data that we used to inform the 2023 MTF allocations. And it was mainly due to the fact that a significant portion of the data that we need to actually make updates to the methodologies that inform the equitable share formulas was not available We, as Letsepa, Dr. Pakis has mentioned, we have then started the communication with the Statistician General in order to prepare for the 2025 NTEV and to actually then also assess how much data is available with regard to the provincial equitable share formula, for example. Less than 50% of the data that we would require to make updates to the formula was available at the time of determining the equitable share. The Honorable Chair also mentioned specifically with regard to the Western Cape, obviously the anticipated changes in the population, the possible impact for the resulting equitable share allocations. I think that I just wanted to also mention that when we do utilize data to inform the methodologies of the equitable share, more specifically than for, we use the population, there are certain characteristics that are also accounted for with regard to the actual data. In the health component, for example, then we would take into consideration what the risk profile for each of the members of the population then looks like, and that would be specifically then be applicable to members of the population who don't necessarily have medical aid, and that distribution then obviously is different across the country. So I think I just wanted to highlight that even though we do use this information then to actually then make updates to the equitable share formula, there is additional information that is taken into consideration in terms of how do we structure the formula in such a way that it responds to the relative need and demand for services on the ground as it relates to the members of the general population. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Chair. I think the other two questions related to capacity building and how much we're spending there. The other one relates to, I think, on the debt service cost. So I'm going to ask Marvin to come back and add to what I'm going to say now. Obviously, honorable members, the picture that we showed in one of our slides on how much we're spending in terms of capacity building is not complete. So this slide is showing that we're spending roughly per year around 100 and so if you add that 145 there in the infrastructure space with what we're spending in terms of the 2 billion there in 1 year, which is 25-26 in terms of conditional grants in general, you will see that there's a sizable amount that we're spending. So let's say roughly just below 3 billion just from the conditional grants, honorable members. I want to be clear here because we did a study in 2022 where we looked at really how much we're paying in terms of capacity building efforts as government as a whole. And that tune is 9 billion per year. So we're spending 9 billion per year as the three spheres of government in trying to build the necessary capacity at a local government level. Now, by any standards, honorable members, that is very high. To spend that much money per year and given the state of our municipalities, it does mean that, something is not going right. And some of the issues really are really at a governance level, political level, and instability there that needs to be sorted out. But also as the national and the provincial governments, we also play our role in terms of around lack of coordination and how our efforts are being directed at some at assisting municipalities, how unsustainable our efforts are. So for instance, where we train the colleagues, on the various components of their work, when they leave the institution, then they leave the institution worse off. So we've been looking at a coordinated and strategic approach in terms of building capacity, where we're actually looking at the whole of the municipality, and that being driven mainly by the municipality itself. So where we do the diagnostic with the municipality and then identify the issues with the municipality and agree on the next steps and the next levels. It's been an issue that was raised by one of the honorable members around, the I think the implication was that those that are doing well, they should be rewarded for doing well. So you'd find that from these capacity building. So if you have problems, if you have financial management issues, you're going to get a financial management grant, which you can then spend and sometimes not spend in the right areas, but you still get the money, So when the system is designed in that fashion, then it's unlikely to yield the needed results. So there needs to be quite stronger a change management reforms that come with it, but also the skin in the game, the theory of change around these interventions, then would start to assist in ensuring that, we holistically deal with the issue of capacity. There are other efforts, honorable members, that are being driven by they are run at the national level in terms of being led, but they include the provinces as well in the municipalities on the professionalization of the public service, which is inclusive of local government in this particular case. Looking at really the government investing in that platform to ensure that qualified people are appointed for the right positions, and then that the different industries also play a role in terms of holding their members accountable. So there's quite a lot that is brewing, that is helping to address the issue of capacity. And from the conditional grants review process as well, we're looking at how do we rationalize these many support initiatives to make them much more impactful and much more focused. And then when it comes to the debt service cost, honorable members, so the members may have missed the point. So I said it was a combination of issues. It's not just a one issue. So and on one end, I alluded to the borrowing demand growing from our side, and this is also driven by many other elements in terms of our budgets. Where there's when the economy is not growing, then and there's less household consumption expenditure, and they are higher in inflation rates and interest rates, and their lower net exports. So all those things affect, our GDP and our ability to then finance our own programs. Then that would lead to us having to then go and borrow. So I indicated that the performance of Transnet, for instance, in terms of its many challenges, as well as ESCOM and its many challenges, have also contributed, to where we are as a state, where we find ourselves in a state where we need to borrow more because we're not growing. So when we're growing, we're able to use that to finance our programs. But when we're not, it means, we do need to try to find ways to then boost the economy. I don't have the actual figures, honorable member, in terms of, you asked a specifically on, the balance between borrowing for investment and borrowing for current expenditure. And I think that would need a detailed analysis of that, because some of the things we would consider to be current expenditure, for instance, would be, say, investment in educators, because we're paying salaries there in the main, but that's not, that contributes massively also to, to growth in the economy because of the importance of education, in doing those bits and pieces, but definitely governments, I think plans are always on the the investment, borrowing for investment to boost, especially infrastructure. Our minister is a huge champion of infrastructure investment, you know, because of its multipliers in terms of creating jobs as well, you know, as a byproduct of that investment there, but also holding the economy together. So massively, a large chunk is going into the investment in terms of our borrowing, but quite certainly there are some elements that could go to current expenditure, and here we have to be able to be clearly able to define, you know, what we put under that, so that, you know, we can deal decisively in a manner that would satisfy the honorable member there. So in terms of, I think it is the honorable chair who acknowledged that, you know, there's these issues, you know, that contribute to where we are in terms of, you know, poor or low growth trajectory. You know, what are we doing? So specifically, there are specific interventions for specific sectors. You know, there's Operation Vulindlela that is pulling all those together. But in terms of really to deal with the Transnet issues, there's the National Logistics Crisis Committee, you know, which aims at really improving the performance, you know, of freight rail, you know, and our ports as well, to make them more competitive. I mean, to modernize the system as well, because that contributes quite significantly. And then the honorable members would then be aware of all the efforts that are also in the energy and electricity space, where we're actually making headways in terms of the split, you know, between transmission and generation and, you know, and so forth. So there are these other elements that are taking place. But quite importantly, honorable members, what we're talking about today is actually part of the solution to the problem, the fiscal consolidation, you know, where we're actually implementing these spending reductions. We're implementing these measures to improve efficiency in government system of expenditure. But also the measures around the tax, improving the tax collection, are also some of the measures that, you know, are being implemented to then try and deal with these issues. We'd really like to go back, you know, to the pre-2008-9, you know, scenario where we're realizing the primary budget surpluses are there in a meaningful way, which helped us to deal with the debt service cost quite decisively at the time. But we all have to do all these things while protecting, you know, the social spending, and there are also other measures that, you know, we speak about in chapter 6 of the budget review, where we're talking about the reconfiguration of the state, you know, in order to also reduce some fat or inefficiencies in the system by rationalizing some state institutions, and the look at, you know, on the size of cabinet and so forth, are also some of the measures that are being considered. Chair, I think we can come back to you at this point. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. I just want to quickly check if there are any members in the public that want to ask a question. Otherwise, I will do another round of questions. Mr. Ngobeni.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to respond. You raised an issue around Cape Town, whereby they have requested the Department of Human Settlements to shift funds from poor, or rather projects that they currently have challenges, to projects that are moving at a much faster pace. So
it was regarding the security.
Yes,
so there are projects where contractors, due to security, they're being like chased off, and there's security issues. So in the meantime, they wanted to move that money to other projects. So I wanted to find out how that works. So Ms. Lerato already explained regarding the provincial, obviously, part, but if you could help me regarding the local part, thanks.
Okay, yes, thanks for that, Chair. So basically here, Chair, it's not necessarily the shifting of funds between components, but it rather the adjustments to the implementation plan that the municipality had at the beginning of the year. So as they correctly indicated to say they are having security challenges in some of the projects whereby they can't proceed. So they have requested human settlements to rather shift the money meant for that project to other projects. So that is the right way to go on about it. I just don't have the details in terms of why human settlements is not acceding to the city's request. But I think what we can then do is that we maybe between me and Mr. Kenyon, we can then maybe get the city to engage us, and then we can then maybe engage human settlements on their behalf as well. But I'm also hoping that given City of Cape Town has received additional funding for the informal settlements upgrading grant, so which will necessitate obviously the adjustment to the implementation plan in the form of either accelerating projects or adding new projects, so which will necessitate the adjustment. So I'm hoping they will then also factor the city's request in terms of the shifting of funds from certain projects to other projects. But yeah, in the absence of that, yeah, I propose that we, between me and Mr. Kenyon, we engage outside the meeting, and then we can engage with the city and try and see how we can resolve this. But then obviously, I know that business plans for both the informal settlements upgrading grant and the urban settlements development grant were approved already in this year. I think a month or two after the 24-25, sorry, the 23-24 financial year had already started, which robbed obviously the cities about a month or two. So that alone as well as delayed the implementation of projects. So, and also coupled with this, we'll consider then to support the city in terms of the rollover process in the event they are unable to fully spend the funds owing to these challenges, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think that would be very helpful. I mean, I don't understand why a department wouldn't reply to another department for a whole month. So that would be very helpful. Thank you so much. Let me just have a look if there are any questions from the public before I open up for another round for the members. I don't see any hands from members of the public. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, I just want to check if anyone from the public submitted any written comments. Okay, no problem. I know there's a very passionate community member, Mr. Rademeyer from Drakenstein, who's also always very interested in our meetings. But with that, I'm going to then open for another round of questions. Okay, otherwise I have some follow-ups. Just in terms of the Bella bill, Mr. Gobin, you indicated that you'll check and provide for us whether it's in the fiscal risk register. That would be much appreciated. If we could please get that, please. Then in terms of the census, firstly, I'm struggling to understand because two different people now mentioned that some of the information isn't available. Now, that doesn't make any sense to me, and maybe I'm just not understanding how the respective process is working between Stats SA sending you the information to National Treasury, because the census is done. And my understanding is the data belongs to the South African government. So I don't understand the comments referencing that you're essentially struggling to get information from Stats SA. If I can just get some clarity on that, maybe I'm misunderstanding the conversation in that regard. Then you indicated that you're aiming to implement the census data by the 2025 MTIF, but do you have a timeline? I mean, it's obviously there's different aspects of the census data. notwithstanding the fact that you've indicated some challenges in getting this particular information, do you have a project timeline for when these particular data sets will be phased in? Then, in terms of the census, I get the comments regarding, even in terms of the population data that will be phased in, sometimes certain characteristics of the population data will be catered for. But when it comes to medical aid specifically, so if you don't have medical aid, I know that you're factored in. The problem is also if you have a minimum medical aid, say someone has very, very little medical aid that they've taken out, they're not necessarily going for the top-notch band in their medical. What ends up happening is when that medical aid runs out, people will still end up going to public hospitals and public clinics, and they are then not essentially then catered for in terms of the formula. Not only that, but in places where there's only a public hospital or a public clinic, you don't have a private option. I'm going to give my constituency as an example. My constituency is Laingsburg in the Central Karoo. There's only one hospital in Laingsburg, and it is a public hospital, and there's only one clinic. It is a public clinic. So whether you now have medical aid in Laingsburg or not is quite frankly irrelevant, because you can only go to Laingsburg Public Hospital or Public Clinic, and then essentially that hospital and clinic loses out because you're not catering for those with medical aid that have to go to hospital. If, God forbid, something happens to me while I'm in my constituency and I have medical aid, it means that you are actually not compensating the Laingsburg Hospital for helping keeping me healthy, essentially. Then, to my understanding also, National Treasury has previously confirmed in a previous budget meeting that home-based care services are not included in the current formula component. So I know there's an attempt to make up for that through the respective subsidies, which, to be honest, I'm still not convinced is necessarily good practices through the grant, for example. But essentially what ends up happening is if you have a better health system where people don't need to go to the hospital or clinic to get their services, but we are able to go to the people, then what ends up happening is we then get punished for having a better operational system. And that was in a previous budget meeting that was confirmed by National Treasury. Then, for example, in the education component of the provincial equitable share formula, special education needs is also not properly accounted for. And I haven't really heard any updates regarding that component of the formula in the past 2 to 3 years, because it is not the same price to be catering for special education needs. And again, I know there's an attempt to make up for some of this through the grant, but it's not sufficient. Then in the economic GDP component, there's essentially GDP. And in a previous DORA mandate that we've given as a committee, one of the things that we proposed at the time was that good governance should be accounted for, and that there are certain then incentives that are given then for good governance, because the better you're governed doesn't necessarily mean that your equitable share is going to increase. In fact, your equitable share might decrease because you're governing better, because people might not need your services. So yeah, then, but that also relates to when Mr. Pakis mentioned it's also about how the system is designed, and it really is correct that the current system is designed for dysfunction. And to my knowledge, for example, cost of living adjustments are also not properly accounted for in the formula. And then just a comment, I know Mr. Pakis mentioned the improved tax collection that we are hoping for. The problem with the current tax brackets is the minister and the National Treasury now kept to the tax brackets the same. So what ends up happening is it seems like you're not increasing taxes, but you don't actually tell people, actually, this doesn't account for bracket creep. So if someone's work now says, okay, we're going to give you an inflationary increase on your salary, if for any reason that person now goes into a new bracket, they're going to end up paying more taxes in terms of the income tax and not less. So usually usually there's like inflation at least increases on the tax bracket to try and account for these almost inflationary increases that employers will also then give their employees. But we haven't seen this in this year's tax proposal. So I am concerned that essentially what this then means is that people will be getting less to take home to their families, instead of at the very least being able to compete with the inflation and what will essentially be the real salary coming home. But that is more a comment rather than a question. Just want to check, I don't see any other hands, because if I don't see any other hands, then I'm going to conclude this round then. Okay, I'm concluding the round then. Mr. Pakis, over to you and your team.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to invite Olorato and Mandla to come in on these questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think I wanted to clarify, in my previous response, it was applicable to the current provincial equitable share and obviously then the plans then for the future. I think as a starting point, what I wanted to mention was that in the approach of releasing the data, StatsSA did say that they are taking a phased approach in terms of the release of the data. So the official release of the data last year, October, didn't actually include some of the disaggregated data that we would need to make updates to some of the components in the formula. So for example, even if the total figures for population are available, with regard to the figures that are available for the provincial numbers, for components like the health components, we need the data further disaggregated into age and sex, particularly because of how the component has been structured to take into consideration the level of healthcare need for members of the population at different ages, but also for the different gender. So when we did engage with StatsSA, then they said that the approach that they're taking is that there's a phased approach to the release of the data, and some of the information that would be required is not readily available. Another example is information for income and expenditure, which is anticipated only to be released at this stage, or in this year. With regard to the timelines, we obviously then have timelines that are built into how the budget process would unfold. And that is mainly then the timelines that would inform how we actually then approach the determination of the equitable shares, which is why then we have chosen to actually begin our conversations or engagements now with StatsSA to identify the information that is available at this stage, and also then with their phased approach with some of the information that they need as to exactly when some of the information would be available. We do have different levels of consultation that we have to undertake, particularly then with subnational government, leading all the way to when we do then table the medium-term budget policy statement and the main budget. But in essence, then we will be managing that within the stipulated timelines that we have in place for our budget process. The Honourable Chair also mentioned concerns with regard to members who would run out of their own personal resources in terms of healthcare, and then they would obviously use public healthcare facilities within the health component. And I think maybe I just want to highlight that within this session, in the examples that I made, I didn't necessarily also elaborate on all of the components or all of the information that is utilized then to determine the equitable share formula. But within the healthcare component, we also then do use the number of visits to primary healthcare facilities as well as hospitals, where we obtain that information from the district health information system through the Department of Health. So if it does happen then that provinces then do experience an influx of members of the general population where there is the scenario that the Honorable Chair has mentioned, that information then would be captured in the data then that we would receive from the Department of Health. But I think I just want to also highlight then the sector then is responsible for managing that system and for ensuring that then they would also capture the information of the people who would use the public healthcare facilities. So there is a balance as well within the formula. Similar to health, we see that in the education component, that even though we account for the number of children who are of a school-going age from the mid-year population estimates, we also then use the enrollment numbers from the Department of Basic Education, so that we also then account for the number of children then who are obviously then enrolled and sitting in the classrooms. So I think I just wanted to mention that that's how we also then account for the utilization of the facilities in the public healthcare system as well as in education. Thank you, Chair.
Mandla, do you have anything to add?
No, thanks, Chair. I think I'm largely covered.
Okay, thanks. Chair, I think we should come back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Colleagues, with that, we've come to the end of the question and answer session. There were no members of the public present. So I'm going to say thank you to the National Treasury. It's really been absolutely wonderful working with everyone throughout this past 5 years. I think in the Western Cape particularly, we've really gone above and beyond to try and improve our budget processes, not only from a governance side, but essentially from a parliamentary oversight side. And I think we've truly achieved much. The next sessions that we will have in budget essentially is the negotiating mandate and the final mandate stage. But essentially, this is the last presentation that we will be doing in budget for this term. And I just want to say thank you to everyone, to National Treasury, to Provincial Treasury, and to the respective colleagues. It's been absolutely wonderful working with everyone, and I wish you all the best. With that, I'm going to excuse the departmental officials so they can go about their day-to-day jobs. I'm just going to thank you so much. I'm just going to ask that the members just remain behind for some administration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot, Chair.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chair. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Wonderful. Okay. Members, just on the negotiating mandate process. So as you would know, usually we give members now some extra time to put their thoughts together. We don't do it on the same day anymore. So our negotiating mandate meeting will be 8 o'clock on Monday morning. Ms. Kamish, can I just check? Would it be in order if we give members until Monday morning, 7 o'clock to send in their comments? Alternatively, to raise it in the meeting at 8 o'clock for the negotiating mandate? Okay, members, so for written comments, are you in order that you must then send in your written comments by 7 o'clock Monday morning? And if it's only oral comments that you're making, that you can then table those at 8 o'clock on Monday morning?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you so much. That will be that then. And then I think we only have, just want to check quickly. There were 2 requests for informations we had. It was regarding the fiscal register as well as, sorry, let me just mute everyone else along. So otherwise there's background noise. We had the fiscal register that we asked for, and then we asked for them just to engage the city regarding the fact that National Department of Human Settlements hasn't gotten back to the city yet in terms of the respective request. Do you want to check if there's other requests for information? If none, Ms. Kamish Ahmed, have you written down any specific information other than what we've requested so far? Maybe I've missed something. Ms. Kamish Ahmed? Okay, in the meantime, I'll take member van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this is a personal question, but we might consider passing it on. In terms of the assessment of projects that might qualify for the conditional grants, to what extent is it a negotiated result? And to what extent is it a top-down decision on what of these projects that are submitted for consideration to be funded through conditional grants? To what extent is it a top-down decision to say, but this project in this province will be financially supported, and these projects in these provinces will not be supported? Because I think it's safe to assume that the demand for funding far exceeds the final allocated amounts. And I am concerned that it might be, to a large extent, a top-down decision, and that it's not a negotiated one, even amongst provinces, to point out the need or the difference that a project might be able to make to the South African economy and to the wellness of people. So I would very much like to understand that the decision-making process when it comes to conditional grants. I do see that some provinces get almost, percentage-wise, a much bigger conditional grant than some of the other provinces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My understanding of it all is that the condition of the respective conditional grant is set by the respective department. So the conditions won't always be the same. And in terms of the application process, you have to apply, essentially, is my understanding, for your conditional grant. I remember, I think it was either last year or the year before, for example, I think George got a really big conditional grant in an infrastructure matter of some sort. And then when, upon inquiry as to why the other municipalities didn't qualify, essentially it was one of those conditional grants where you apply for the respective grant if you think that you qualify. Because, yeah, I think it was George, and I think 3 or 4 years ago, Mossel Bay also did something similar. But I'm happy to put that in just so we can get more clarification, because I could be wrong on some of it. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, you got that from Member van der Westhuizen? So, yeah, so it's essentially the methodology of allocation of conditional grants to provinces and municipalities, how the criteria gets set up, how the decision gets made, and how the reasons and rationality for that gets laid out for approval, or essentially declining the respective request, or stuff like that. Okay. But I'm sure Ms. Kamish Ahmed will engage Member van der Westhuizen regarding the nice English part.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've summarized it absolutely spot on. It's about the evaluation process for these projects as well, and who has got the deciding vote in this regard when these are finally assessed and evaluated in terms of what should be funded, because they're more deserving than perhaps other projects that are being submitted.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Are there any other requests for information? Okay, if none, then we'll move on to other committee administration. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, I think we have one set of minutes that we just have to go through. Okay, let's just have a look. So in that meeting was myself, Member Bruncase, and Member Murray. Some of the other members are not currently in the meeting. Okay, cool. Let's quickly go down. That was 25th. There are no edits on page 1. We can go to page 2. Okay, colleagues, if I could get a mover for the minutes if there are no edits. So essentially between myself, Members Murray and Member Bruncase. Members, are you still with me, or am I radio in the background?
Yes, Chair. Good morning, good morning, good morning to all the colleagues.
Hi, Member Brinkes. Are you in order with the minutes?
Yes, Chair, it's fine. Thank you. I move to adopt.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I assume, Chair, that you will support that proposal?
I support the minutes. I tend not to, as from the chair, to always intervene, but I'm happy to support. Thank you so much. With that, the minutes are adopted. And then just some feedback matters. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, if we can just deal with anything for the committee. Just
Thank you, Chairperson. On the 29th of April, the committee will have the last meeting, and also we sent a request to Western Cape, the legal unit regarding the money amendment bill procedure. Chair, can you hear me? Hello?
we can hear you. You are a little soft, but we can hear you.
Is it better?
It is better, thank you.
Okay. Okay, my Mfundo says she cannot hear me. Okay, let me just check quickly my volume.
You're
I'll put it
much
on now.
louder now. I
Okay,
can hear
it's
you.
louder. Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Chair, we the committee will a letter from you will go to Western Cape Legal Unit regarding the technical task team on the Western Cape money bill procedure for the task team to come and give a feedback on the 29th of April. That will be the committee's last meeting.
Perfect, thank you so much. So they will just then be updating us on that particular process.
Correct.
With that, perfect. Okay. Members, with that, is there anything else before we conclude?
Nothing from my side.
Nothing from my side, Chair. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Thank you, everybody.
Well,
Bye.
well done. Thank you.
Bye.